Hi, welcome to Truth and Wellness. I'm Gail McKenzie, your host, and I'm so glad that you have joined us because we have someone with us today with an incredible story of faith and courage. Our guest comes from Gallatin, Tennessee. His name is Mike Harrell, and as you may notice, he is blind. He has been through a lot of trying times, I believe, to come to the place where he is here today. And I just am so excited that you're going to be able to hear his story of triumph and living with a disability. I want to welcome you, Mike, and I'm glad that you're here with us today.
Well, thank you, Gail. I'm excited about the opportunity.
Yes. We probably should begin before kind of the beginning of your story when you graduated, I believe, from college and with a respiratory therapy degree. Is that right?
That's true.
Okay.
Finally, it took me a long time, but I finished a bachelor's degree in respiratory therapy.
Okay.
Graduated and took a job down in Punta Gorda, Florida.
Punta Gorda, Florida. Okay, that's a ways down there, huh?
Yes, it is.
Yes. Okay.
And I had my wife and my 13-month-old child, and we pulled up our stakes and moved down to Florida, and I started my job there at the hospital.
Okay, so you were a respiratory therapist. You were doing your job, but you had a unique transportation that you used every day to get there, right?
Yes, I love to ride my 10-speed bike.
Okay.
And I rode to and from house to work and back on my bike, and I loved it. And it was kind of related to that. That's how I got in trouble.
That's how you got in trouble, didn't you? And I believe that was in 1980, is that right?
Yes, that's true. It was 1980.
1980, and it was a special day. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yes, it was Mother's Day of 1980, May 11th. And I was riding my bike home from work.
Sure.
And it was about 3:30 in the afternoon or so, because I worked the day shift. And there's a river between my work and where we lived. It's the Peace River. It's about a mile wide. And there's a bridge that runs over the river. It has a real high crest to it. I used to love to pedal up, and it was great fun to ride down the downside.
Always is, isn't it? Yes, yes.
You got going good and fast, and then
Yes.
when I came to the end of the bridge, the bicycle path ended at that point.
I see.
And so I was riding along the side of the road
Right.
and had to turn left into an angled street. And apparently there was a car who was looking back, yielding into the traffic coming on. He didn't see me, and I don't know anything about what happened.
So you don't remember then?
I remember
anything?
nothing of the
Really?
accident.
Really?
And I'm glad, because I think it probably hurt.
Yeah, it might. It might. Maybe that's a blessing, right, in disguise.
Yes, I think it is.
Yes.
Because the car hit me with the front of the bike directly. I flew over the
Wow.
handlebars and wound up in the windshield with the left side of my head into the windshield.
Really? Really? Wow.
He drove out into the road and then stopped, and I slid off the hood of the car, and they found me crumpled in a heap on the road.
Wow. Wow. So your first memory then was what? Waking up in the hospital, I'm assuming then, or?
Yes.
Wow.
I remember some doctor trying to explain something to me that didn't make a bit of sense. All I knew was that from the top of my head to the bottom of my feet, I hurt.
Wow.
I became aware that everything was kind of black. I didn't see anything.
Sure.
And it took me a long time to really gain enough consciousness that I knew what was going on.
I see. Now, did you break anything? Did you have any broken bones or anything?
Oh yes, I broke the femur in my left leg, and that's really what kept me in the hospital for 13 weeks. They put me in traction.
Wow.
And I broke my left arm, and a lot of the bones in my face, particularly around the left eye, were broken.
Because of where you hit then on the
Right.
windshield, I'm assuming.
Right.
Wow.
And that's what actually destroyed the left eye, was all those bones broke, and it ruptured the left eye.
I see. Okay. And so you had a doctor that was explaining to you your injuries and the result of those injuries. And what did he say to you?
Basically, as I pieced it together, he told me that I'd been in the accident and that my left eye had been severely damaged. They had sewed it back together, but he didn't know what the outcome of that would be.
I see.
So for the first, many, many weeks in the hospital, there was no one knew what the result would be as far as my vision was concerned.
So there was some hope that you might gain some vision back, is that right? Or?
There was, because the eye was so filled with blood.
And they wanted
that had to clear out.
to kind of be absorbed then, right?
And they couldn't see back in there to see what the retina looked like.
I see.
So it took some time.
Yeah, yeah. So you got this news. What were some of the thoughts that you had? What was going on in your mind when you heard that?
Well, once I started to be able to actually process things, I thought, well, this is just great. I'm a respiratory therapist.
Oh boy, yeah.
What is a blind respiratory therapist supposed to do? And I couldn't help but think about my wife and my new little girl.
Sure.
And how was I going to take care of them and support them as a father and a husband ought to?
Wow.
When I am now blind and have no clue what I could do professionally.
Wow. You had some dark days, I'm assuming. Maybe a few days that were
yes,
a little discouraging.
and I
maybe.
think the hardest days for me were the days that you would think should have been kind of a joyful time, because after being in the hospital for 13 weeks, now it's time to go home.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I knew I was supposed to be happy, and I knew there were people waiting for me at home, but honestly, I was scared to death.
I'm sure.
Because I was a blind individual, newly blind. I had no idea of any resources. I didn't know what I was going to do. How was I even going to get around the house? I didn't know how all this worked.
Sure.
So I was really frightened.
I guess so.
That was the hardest time.
I'm sure it was. I'm sure it was. And I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. What helped you to get through those days?
I think what I could say is that maybe I could point out a question that I was asked by people who had come to visit me in the hospital there.
Sure.
And they were Christian people who meant well. But, you know, the question on their mind, and they asked me, was, why did God let something like this happen to a nice guy like you?
Wow.
And I said, well, strange that you should ask me.
Because you're asking the same question probably in your mind.
And I
would
knew
assume.
I had to
Yeah.
consider those things.
Sure, sure. You had to face it, didn't you?
Yes. But what I realized then was that God never promised that only good things were going to happen. And he doesn't explain all of his reasons.
No, he doesn't do that, does he?
But what he did promise was to be there with you. And I thought about Christ and what he did for me, and the suffering and the burden he took on himself for me. And I knew he was able to help me go through whatever I had to go through.
Wow.
And that really was what supported me through the whole situation. It's what continues to support me now.
Even today, right, right. Just knowing that he's here with you. Yep, that's really great. So you're at home. You have a wife who has to adjust also. She's got a husband who has now come home who can't see. What were some of the resources that you did discover, and how did you find help? Where did you go?
Well, that really was an important question and something that really was a struggle. First, I do want to say that, you know, it's often the person who has a disability, the person who's been injured that you think about. But it's really rough for the spouse.
Yes, I can understand.
Because she doesn't know what to do with me. I'm blind now. You know, she's used to me being as I was.
Sure.
It was a very stressful time for her. She visited me consistently in the hospital. We had our 13-month-old. She had to find someone to care for our daughter, Jolene. You know, and it was hard for her.
Sure.
And it was a real stress. And again, our relationship was cemented by the fact that we both trusted in God that He was going to see us through it.
And he was there for you, wasn't he?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
And for
I'd say
her.
that's the first resource. The fellow who hired me, actually, who was the director of the respiratory department, was not willing to let me just quit.
Well, good for him.
He said,
That's great.
you've got too many skills, you have too much to offer, we've got to find a way to get you back to work.
Wow.
So, you know, I started researching like magnification systems because at that time I still had a little vision.
Okay, in your right eye?
In the right eye.
I see, okay.
It's gotten worse
Okay.
over time, and so now all I see is a little bit of light.
Okay,
But then with
All right.
significant magnification,
sure.
I could see some things and could read if I could get things large enough. One call to some place when I was asking about magnifiers brought up, they said, well, have you checked with the Florida Division of Blind Services?
So that was a state then, a
Yes.
state entity or
Right,
okay, resource.
yes. And I said, well, no, who are they?
Where do I get in touch? How
Yep.
do I do
so
that?
I looked them up in the phone book, and it really, that's what opened all of the doors to all of the adaptive equipment that I've ever used.
So if some of our viewers who may have a relative or whatever who have they found themselves in this kind of a situation, that's probably the first place to go then, would be to their state services. Would that be right?
Yes, every
Okay.
state has a organization in it that deals with rehabilitation
Sure.
and services for blind people.
Sure, that's great to know.
And it was that organization that really finally got the resources that I need. And it has continued to grow. I mean, at first all it was a magnification system that was like a closed circuit TV system. Then I actually did pulmonary function tests, which are breathing tests,
Okay.
which use a device that measures your breathing
Sure.
and does a lot of analysis with it.
Sure.
I worked with the company who developed the computer program that was used for the pulmonary function device that we used. They actually developed, for me specifically, a program that would verbally tell me what the machine was doing.
Really? They made this specific for you?
Yes.
Wow.
And it was a program
is
designed
amazing.
only for me.
Wow.
And I was able to do pulmonary function tests using that computer with that speech synthesis.
Wow.
And I
Just-
would purposely go back and compare some that I did to some that had been done years prior, and they compared perfectly. So it was a very efficient system, and it worked really well.
So you were able to go back to work, and with these assistants with you, assistants that they gave you, then you were able to fully function as a respiratory therapist.
Yes,
That's
it's
exciting.
what returned me to work.
Wow. Maybe you might want to share, why don't you tell us some of the adapted resources that are there for you. For instance, we were talking about your watch. Why don't you show us, what does your watch do?
Well-
because you can't see the watch, but you wear a watch.
Right.
So,
And they make Braille watches, but I get annoyed with having to push a button and the thing flips open and you check it.
okay.
So this watch, you push the little button and
It's 8:50 p.m.
it tells me what time it is.
She speaks to you. That's
Yep.
wonderful.
Yes, she speaks to me and tells me the time. That's a
wonderful.
simple device, but it really means a lot. It gives me a lot of freedom.
I guess so.
It means when I'm speaking, as I speak professionally,
Okay.
people don't have to worry that I'll run terribly over time.
You check it occasionally, or do you set it? Can you set it for her to
I
speak?
can set it for a time. I'll check it occasionally.
All right.
And that's one of the devices that's available. There's
Sure.
just endless things now. And if you're going to have a visual impairment and be blind, now's the time to do it.
Okay. They keep developing, I'm sure, newer and
it's
better
just
things.
the resources are just, they've just blossomed. It's just tremendous.
Sure.
The state actually sent me to a training center for a month
Okay.
where I learned
Wow.
to use a computer that has voice synthesis
Okay.
so that whatever comes up on the screen is actually read to me verbally.
So even as you're typing, it reads to you so you know what you're typing.
That's correct.
Wonderful.
And
That's great.
it can be specifically designed to meet my needs. It can read certain things on the screen and not others. It can just be specifically tailored to what I need it to read.
So it can be set up just for you.
Yes.
So each individual can, yeah, like you say, have it tailored for them. That's amazing, isn't it? That is incredible.
And
What a
those
gift.
sorts of things are actually how I went back to work. I ultimately became the director of the department.
No way. Did you really?
Yes.
That is
And that's one thing that,
that is amazing.
I thought, well, great, I'll go back to work, but I'm going to be limited. I'll never be able to be the director. I can't do it. Well, God did not have that in mind. God is not limited.
He is not. That's
And I became the director. I was manager of that department for close to 25 years.
really, wow.
I became president of the Florida Society for Respiratory Care. I did that for 2 terms.
Wow, that's amazing.
Not long after the accident and through the following couple of years, it became real apparent to me that though the people in the church and all the members there in Florida loved me and really cared, they were not comfortable with me. I would stand in the foyer and there'd be a 10-foot empty circle around me
Really?
because people just didn't know, what do you talk to a blind person about? How do you get their attention when you can't catch their eye, All of those things just make people uncomfortable.
Things that we just take for granted when we have our sight, and here, and you're right, it does. People are, probably look the other way, though, because they don't know what to do or to say.
And that's true. So in my mind, I really wanted to find a way of helping people be comfortable with me.
Sure.
In the church bulletin was an insert one Sabbath morning that talked about a disabilities awareness seminar that was being held at the Florida Hospital. And
This is in Orlando, Florida.
in Orlando, Florida. And we lived in Port Charlotte, which is about 3 hours away or so. And I thought, oh, what an opportunity. It's only 3 hours away. We could get there. I can learn how I can help this church relate better to me and help them with me. And that was really where it began.
To be able to understand you and where you were coming from, yes.
The interesting thing was when we actually went to the seminar, both my wife and I did.
She went with you, which was really great. That's
Yes, she did. Because really the disability involves not just me. It really impacts her life at least as significantly as it does mine.
Yes.
So we went together. By the time we were done with that seminar, which was provided by Joan Bova, who's just a dynamic person who has a disability herself.
Okay, really? Okay. So she was talking about something she was very familiar with.
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
And she's very passionate about, and really her profession was to work for the Centers for Independent Living there in Florida.
I see.
So it really was even her profession. It was really a dynamic seminar. But when I walked away from that seminar, the concept for me had shifted from how can I help people relate to me to how can I help the church relate to anyone with a disability. What can we do? Because the church does not ignore people with disabilities intentionally.
Right.
Nobody does that.
Right.
We do that because we don't know, we're not educated. We don't understand. And it was that that got me excited.
Yeah.
And that's how I became involved in disabilities ministries in the church.
Wow. And so now you are active in that. You speak, you mentioned that. You are trying to help us who have our sight and hearing or whatever to see people.
I can overcome just about any of the physical barriers. Just by using adaptive equipment, there's different ways of doing things. I can do just about anything I need to do or wish to do. I just have to do it differently. And that's okay. But the real barriers, the real difficulties come with people's attitudes.
Yes. Yes.
That's the hard thing to change.
Yes.
It's easy to learn how to use a computer. For a person who uses a wheelchair, it's easy to build a ramp. It's not so easy to help people know how they can successfully look at people with disabilities simply as people.
Right, right.
Because that's really the issue. It's people first.
It is. You mentioned that you're able to do just about anything, and I know we were talking earlier before the show, and you shared with me that you even did some scuba diving. Is that right?
Yes, that's true.
Okay, tell us just quickly a little bit about that. How did you do that?
Well, I can remember from the time I was little, I used to watch Sea Hunt.
Okay, all right.
Which was a scuba diving program, and I always wanted to learn to scuba dive, but never was in a situation where I could do that.
Okay.
Living in Florida seemed to me the perfect opportunity.
Oh, yes, I guess so.
But we only lived there for 6 weeks before the accident. So I was blind, and I said, well, you know, after I started becoming more and more comfortable with myself and who I was and who I am, I said, well, who can say that I can't scuba dive? A member of the church was a scuba dive instructor, and I talked to him, and he was excited about it and said, sure, we can do that. You're supposed to always dive with somebody anyway. You're never supposed to dive alone.
Right.
So there were ways to do it, and I took scuba diving from David and got certified as a scuba diver and really enjoyed the time I had underwater. Yet the interesting thing is that people ask me, you know, well, why would you, being blind, want to scuba dive? You can't see. And I think that kind of betrays the real issue. Because sight is really only one way you perceive your world. Sight is only one sense. Certainly it's great, but there are a lot of other senses.
That's right.
I perceive my world differently, and that's okay. Because when I scuba dive, I feel the weightlessness that there is. I can feel the bubbles going up around my ears and over my head. I can hear the sounds under the water. I can feel things. And you were mentioning that David would put in my hand things like a sea cucumber so I could feel,
it.
What is a sea cucumber like.
Yeah.
And I can remember combing the bottom looking for shark's teeth.
So you could feel with your hands.
I could feel with my hand, and I found lots of shark's teeth.
That's great.
So it's just a different way of living and perceiving your world.
That's right. Now, you know, before we close here, we've got to introduce somebody here because there's somebody that is by your side constantly, and he's been just relaxing here. And I don't know if we can get a picture of him. He's kind of gone to sleep on us. This is
Chief, you want to sit up?
Oh, he's going to get him here.
Yeah, just sit up.
Can we put him on camera there so we can see him?
There's Chief.
There's Chief. Now, he is your constant companion, I assume, and he helps you to get around. And
yes, he is.
He's your eyes, right?
Yes, he is. He is my guide dog, and he has basically set me free.
Isn't that amazing?
I travel, I go places, I speak, I travel, I fly to California and speak out there, I fly wherever, and I do that independently. And I just have Chief find the door in, find the registration desk, find the counter. He can, once we've been to the hotel room, he knows the hotel room, and he does a fine job.
That is
It
amazing.
gives me the freedom to just do what I need to do.
He is a true friend, isn't he?
Yes, he is. And
Yes.
he's a smart guy, even if he's a baby.
Are you a baby, Chief? That's
Yes, he
great.
is.
Well, I am so grateful that you have been able to share with us today. And I would like to ask you to share with maybe, there may be a viewer out there who has a disability and they may be discouraged. What could you say to them? What is the biggest thing that you have found that has helped you through all of your journey with your disability?
I think the most important thing is to, first of all, remember that you are still who you are. Having a disability has not changed who you are. There are many ways to do the things you need to and want to do. Doing them differently is okay. Don't let limitations limit you. They don't have to be there. Work with what you have, hunt down your resources, and don't let anybody tell you you cannot do it. You can accomplish what you need to accomplish. And always remember that God has never forsaken. He won't forsake you. He is there, and He is there to give you the strength you need and to guide you and to find the ways to do what He wants for you to do.
Wow. All I can say is amen to that, Mike. That has been a great testimony. And I know that it's touched the hearts of those who have been viewing us today, and I am so grateful that you've shared your story and your testimony. And I want to thank you for being with us, for listening to Mike's testimony, and I hope that his story of courage and faith gives you the strength to remember that Jesus is with you. He's not left you. And we'll see you again on Truth and Wellness.